Well, joining me now is the chair of the Iowa Democratic Party. It's Rita Hart. Some of you may remember that name because she is, I think at this point, the participant in what may have been the closest House race in American history. And if not the closest, it's certainly going to be the top five, a House race that was decided by 6 votes a few years back. She said this is arguably politics is her second chapter. She spent the first chapter of her professional life teaching in the public school system. Longtime Iowan, native Iowan, and I appreciate her coming on. Rita Hart, welcome to the ToddCast.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Did I hit the highlights all right?
It's not a great claim to fame that I was looking for, but it was certainly an experience. I should also mention that my husband and I are farmers here in Iowa. I've been on the farm.
Tell me what you grow.
So we're typical Iowa farmers. We grow corn and soybeans. We used to raise cattle and hogs, but now are strictly grain, a little bit of hay ground. So,
any reason why you don't do hogs and cattle anymore? Is it just the room, the space, or is it financial, or what is it?
Well, I would tell you that there was a time when a Secretary of Ag said, "Go big or go home," particularly for us when we were raising hogs, and that wasn't a possibility for us at that time. So that's when we got out of hogs, and then cattle. We had cattle until I went to the state legislature, and my father-in-law was going to be home raising those cattle, and there was some unsafe situations there that caused us to make a decision to make that our last year with cattle. So, it's a ebb and flow, right?
And how much of your corn is for consumption and how much of your corn is for things like feed and stuff? When I say consumption, human consumption, things like that versus using the corn for other, how much of your corn is for other than human consumption, direct human consumption?
Yeah. So, the way that works is, this is field corn. It's not sweet corn. We don't eat the corn. We don't, we raise the product and send it on, so we don't have a lot of control over what happens to it from there. But I would tell you that, we sell our corn to ADM, and they convert it into many different products. So it's converted into ethanol, as has been given lots of consternation, but also to DSGs, which feed animals, and so it's a product that has I think ADM. I don't know the exact number, but there's like 37 different products that come out of any kernel of corn.
That's a great stat, and I know that the more time I spend in Iowa, the more I learn some of those nuggets. I mean, my grandfather got his start in mechanical engineering, designing popcorn plants in Iowa.
Oh wow!
So back in the 50s, what got him to Miami was he got a contract to build sugarcane plants in Havana.
Oh wow!
So he moved his business from Waterloo to Miami. That was quite the transition for my father and his sister. But let me ask you about soybeans. I figure that's actually a nice transition, isn't it, to our more political discussion, which is, what do you do with your soybeans if you can't find a buyer?
Well, then you store them in a bin, and as storage becomes less and less possible because more and more people are not selling their grain directly, then we see things like we've seen in the past where people are filling up various different places with the grain. But it is a real problem right now that we've seen, as we could have predicted, right? This is very predictable that when you put the kinds of tariffs on China, that and when China is our largest consumer of soybeans, that's going to be a huge problem. I was in the state legislature the last time this happened in 2016 when President Trump first started talking about putting on tariffs. And I stood on the Senate floor and said then that this has never worked out well for farmers, and to be very careful about this, because not only is that affecting individual farmers in the price that they receive and their ability to you can only hang on to grain as long as you can till the price goes up and you make a decision to sell. But the product deteriorates through that
I
process.
was just going to say, how long does a crop hold?
It depends upon your setup. It depends upon, whether you have the ability whether you have a stirrator in your bin, whether you're able to put air in there, et cetera. But because you've got to keep that product as pristine as possible. And Iowa farmers are really good at that. But also people have, financial needs. They can only hold on as long as they can hold on. So, but we know that historically it's never ended up well for farmers. And in a state like Iowa, where our very economy is so ag dependent, that has, big ramifications as people's incomes are lowered, as the process itself becomes a problem for so many different people who are trying to keep this economy going.
So there's talk of trying to basically, what would the government intervention, what is that? What did it look like the last time? And what would you expect if there was some temporary way to sort of make up for the loss in ability to sell your soybeans to China? What does that look like? Is it a government check? Do they buy the product? What is it? What is the subsidy specifically? How does it work?
Yeah, well, first of all, we recognize too, farmers recognize that that we're losing these markets. So we're worried about the fact of what does this do for the future, right? When China finds alternative markets, as is clear that they have gone to Bolivia, they've gone to Argentina. And this happened again in the past. And so Brazil, for example, they totally, really focused in on improving the amount that they can produce. And so now I believe they're number one producer in the country,
so they've just, so a new competitor, regardless of if these barriers go down, all of a sudden, let's say the tariffs go away, the unfortunate unintended consequence of this trade war is that it is allowed Brazil to catch up as a competitor, right?
Correct. Right. And there's so many workarounds, right, that cause problems for us. But what we saw the last time was that this was truly going to affect the popularity of this president, that people are going to, and nobody wants to repeat the horror of the ag crisis of the 80s, right?
Right.
And so, because again, it doesn't just affect the people in agriculture, it affects the entire Iowa economy. And so, so that's why, we received government payments from, and again, last time, they have to figure out where those payments come from. And so you've already heard this administration talking about utilizing the tariff money to pay it back to the farmers, which, again, is, and the system tends to weigh out in favor of the bigger farmers, right? And so there's going to be casualties through a process like this.
It struck me as I was hearing you talk about the impact of tariffs on farmers and the fact that there are essentially two sectors arguably politically pitted against each other within the state of Iowa, right? The manufacturers, the manufacturing base, there's so many counties, particularly in eastern Iowa, whose towns were synonymous with the company that manufactured a good out of that place, right? Whether it's Pella Windows or Pella, Iowa, whether it's, where Maytag once was. And in the manufacturing space, there is a lot of support for tariffs across both parties in some cases, right? But it's almost universal that it doesn't work in the agricultural space. How do you deal with that political tension even in your own party?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, people recognize that, and this is a conversation I have, with farmers, is that we all want to hold China accountable, right? That's the phrase that I hear a lot. We want to hold China accountable. Well, it's pretty hard to hold China accountable when we depend on them. They are our partners in this. They're the consumers. And so, again, it's the idea of tariffs, again, when they are targeted and they make sense and they yield the kinds of results you want, I think that's good economic business, right? But when you can see what's happened historically and when you can see the effects that it's going to have on the markets going forward, I think that makes a lot of farmers really, really nervous.
Well, look, I didn't plan to spend this much time on that, but I think it's important to understand it from somebody who's actually a farmer. So the fact that you are, I thought it was in some ways good education for some of my listeners who may not be as familiar with how the world how some of the Iowa economy works. So let's talk about I think why we wanted to talk with you, why you may wanted to talk with me, which is sort of Iowa's place in rebuilding the Democratic Party. And there seems to be a debate. I think the debate is less left-right. It's more about sort of progressive versus pragmatism a little bit, right? Which is sort of, what does it take to win? And can you do so with your principles, et cetera? How do you think that fight's going inside the party these days? And do you accept the premise that I framed there? And if you don't, please push back.
No, absolutely, Chuck. I think that is paramount for us, that we know that the Democratic Party as a whole in this country has a branding problem that especially here in a state like Iowa, where
the national brand has really stained the Iowa brand. Is that fair to say?
That is exactly right. And that's what I have this conversation with folks. I do a lot of traveling across the state, talking to folks all across the state, and they recognize that, that what the national Democrats, what people believe about the Democratic Party is very much a national picture, which is not what Iowa Democrats are about at all. And so the only way to fix that, I believe, and I think it's clear, is to have conversations with folks so that they recognize that the Democrats here in the state of Iowa truly are concerned about the state of the condition of people being able to get ahead, to be able to afford a good life for their kids and for their families and for a good future. And right now, that is a real struggle because Republicans have been in control for almost 10 years. And what we're seeing is that we're 49th in the country for economic growth, 48th for personal income growth, that our education system has slipped way down past the middle stroke, right? And that right now, as a result of this big, what I call the big, ugly, lousy law, which, is going to really affect our hospitals. And, in general, the folks that we are having these conversations with are rural people who live in, and so much of Iowa is rural, right? That these are folks that are struggling with the grocery prices that have not come down, who are struggling with the fact that their health care is getting more expensive. And again, that's why, right now with this shutdown, that the emphasis has to be to really understand this, how many people here in Iowa get their health care through the Affordable Care Act, and that November 1, these premiums are going up. And as a result, again, childcare is less affordable and less accessible. Our hospitals are being threatened that maybe some of them will close. Maybe a lot of them will have to reduce their services. People are going to have to drive farther to get the health care that they desperately need. And as a result, people are going to, already our rural areas are shelling out, right? More and more people are finding it harder and harder to live in really, really nice places in Iowa. Right now I'm sitting here outside of this little tiny town of Big Rock and the little bit bigger town of Wheatland. And this is a great place to live, but you can't live here if you don't have access to health care, if you can't find childcare for your children, or if it's too expensive. So, and people are willing to drive to get these services, but they know that there's a limit to where it doesn't make sense anymore. And that's why we're seeing so many people leaving the rural areas and moving to the city. That's a loss for Iowa itself.
There's a reason results matter more than promises. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan has become America's largest injury law firm. For the last 35 years, they've recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. It includes cases where insurance companies offered next to nothing, short of shortchanging, seeing if they could get away with it. And Morgan & Morgan fought back, and they won millions. In Pennsylvania, one client was awarded $26 million. It was a staggering 40 times the amount that the insurance company originally offered. That offer, $650,000, whatever it took to sort of get away without paying. So with more than 1,000 lawyers across the country, Morgan & Morgan knows how to deliver for everyday people. So if you're injured, you're looking for a lawyer, check out forthepeople.com/ToddCast or dial pound law, pound 529 on your cell phone. And remember, all law firms are not the same. So give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their fee is free unless they win.
When I think about sort of what's happened to the Democratic Party over the last decade, basically post-Obama, I do think Iowa is the best place to start, because there's no state that has more Obama to Trump counties than Iowa. So if you're going to really figure out the brand problem, how did the Democratic Party, who had a guy named Barack Hussein Obama, right, who people would have said, oh, there's no chance he's going to be able to do well in rural America. He did really well in rural America. He did really well. He carried Iowa twice. But it wasn't just Iowa. He carried Ohio twice. He carried some states that the Democrats no longer think is competitive and actually want to walk away from, right? Florida, Iowa, Ohio, all three in some ways. You hear major party leaders going, don't bother. Those states are gone. You lived it. You saw these counties go from Obama to Trump. Put it in your words. These are your neighbors. Why do you think they went from Obama to Trump and couldn't, like they were sort of did they give up on the Democrats? Or was it they were just looking for something different?
Well, I think there was lots of factors, and the lots and lots of smarter people than I, and pundits have really, looked at.
Yeah, but you live there. I don't think
So-
any pundit could do it. You live there. You have the personal stories. These are your friends and neighbors.
Yeah. So, I think that for one thing, there used to be a time here in Iowa where we concentrated totally on local news and local candidates and talking about the things that actually, directly affect people. And then somehow that switched. And now it's really hard for people to get the local news there because
So
of
you
the
see it
way-
as a local information ecosystem problem.
I think that's one big part of it, right? They're getting the national message, and all of a sudden that is trumping everything else.
All
And
politics
so-
has become all local politics is national now. Is that happening a lot more?
It's much more national oriented than it ever used to be. And so that disconnect between what Iowa Democrats are working for and understand as being important to the people who live in this state suddenly became not what people came to believe about Iowa Democrats. And that was difficult. That's difficult for us to, switch away. Also because so many people, Fox News is, a huge influence here in this state.
It replaced local news.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And our local newspapers, our local radio stations, they've been bought out by conservative entities. There's fewer newspapers. Newspapers are having a harder time surviving. So there's less actual political reporting going on. People have to subscribe to things that cost money. So they're not necessarily getting that kind of information.
Yeah, I worry about these paywalls that news junkies will always find a way to be informed. The question is, what about everybody else?
Right.
Yeah.
So there's so many challenges here that I don't know that, that we were, the ground was shifting underneath our feet. And I think that's part of why we just need to have these conversations so that people can understand that, right? Understand why it's really important to seek out this local news, why it's important to have conversations. And the other thing is, at the national level, things became so divided, and that eked out to all of the states. And it's really affected people's ability to, in the end, I really think that most people have decided they don't want anything to do with either party. They don't like politics. It's nasty. They don't like it, but they all have an opinion. And they all, and the vast majority, especially here in Iowa people really take their politics seriously, as in it's a civic responsibility. So they want to go to the polls. They want to vote, and they want to be educated about that vote. And so so that division has caused them to stop talking to people and having a reasonable conversation and recognizing that, maybe what I'm hearing or what I'm reading is not the exact truth. And I think that's really a big problem for folks. They're trying to figure out what the truth is, and it's not so easy to find. It's not so easy to be confident that you're getting to the truth.
How do you think the National Party's doing right now?
I think this is a really challenging time for Ken Martin and the National Party. I think that, again, they're fighting against a real effort to frame the Democratic Party in a way that is not indicative of the average Democrat across the country. So I think that that they're in transition. And this is what, again, I tell folks as we travel across the state, we have got to identify ourselves as Iowa Democrats and what our priorities are, and talk about these kitchen table issues. We cannot wait for the Democratic Party to get their act together and lead us out of this situation we're in. We've got to be our own leaders to do that. And I'm excited about that right now. I think we are in a good position to do that.
Well, sometimes when you're at a low point, it's almost more exciting to be a part of, right? Because there's only one place to go.
Well, and I think that when President Trump came in at the beginning of this administrative go around, he really came in with this shock and awe. And what happened then was Democrats got very alarmed, and they were scared, they were surprised, they were concerned. And so they got activated. And so, right now, we've got so many good candidates running for so many different things. We've got more volunteers signed up at this point than we've had up for a long, long time. And people they've been showing up, they've been speaking up, they've been standing up, they've gone to they're still going to rallies. There's rallies going on nearly every weekend all across the state. And they've been demanding better representation from their congressional representatives. They've been demanding the town halls. They haven't been getting them, but demanding them. And they're very knowledgeable for that reason. They really want to know, who's going to do something about this. And as a result, now we've got terrific candidates. We've got a real shot at the governorship. I think that's going to be a huge goal for us here in Iowa this time. And we've got 4 congressional districts, and we've got primaries in all 4. Again,
do you think that's healthy, the primary part? Does that a sign of health or a sign of a lack of
union?
I mean, go ahead.
I think in this case, I think it's a real sign of health. These are really, really good candidates.
So would you tell the DSCC, don't try to pick somebody off here, don't push people out, let it be?
Yeah, I think primaries are a really important time for people to really give a good idea of who can succeed. It's the same thing, I think, with, presidential candidates have been coming in here already. I really think all eyes are on Iowa, partly because we've done so well in our special elections. And people, the candidates know that if they can win in a place like Iowa, that's the kind of candidate that can win across the nation. And that's what I think about these congressional candidates as well.
I had a viewer chime in with something, and it struck me that you might be familiar with this kind of strategy, which is how come the state parties don't independently rebrand? Was this person's argument. And I said, well, actually, Minnesota for a long time, they took pride in the fact that they weren't a Minnesota Democratic Party. They were the Democratic Farm Labor Party, your neighbor to the north there. And the Republican Party wasn't the Minnesota Republican Party. They were the Independent Republican Party of Minnesota. And that was on purpose. It was a way to say, hey, no, this is a Minnesota branded party. It is not just simply a local chapter of a national party. And I think about that when Rob Sand was on my podcast, right, when he announced me, and I said, because he was really emphasizing his independent credentials. And I said, why didn't you run as an independent? He said, well, look, there's two parties. And he says, so, if I thought there was another way to run, I might find the other way to run, but this is the way to go. Have you thought about that? Is there a rebranding of because you essentially are making the case that an Iowa Democrat is different than a national Democrat? How do you convince more Iowans of that? And is it worth rebranding?
I would say that an Iowa Democrat is different than what people believe to be true about national Democrats, right? And so, maybe I'm naive, I've only been doing this job for 2.5 years. I've been in politics for a while. I tend to be the glass is half full kind of person, but I really think I'm really feeling really strong that we have got to strengthen this party completely, and that the things that we stick up for working families, for trying to help people get ahead, for healthcare as a human right. These are things that will make the world a better place. And so that's why I'm all about strengthening the entire Democratic Party, but doing that through the lens of Iowa, because I think that this is a place where you can do that with common sense, with talking across the aisle, with working with people of all stripes. That's why, Dan, I'm thrilled that we have so many candidates up and down the ticket so far that will appeal to Democrats, but they will also appeal to independents and reasonable Republicans. That's how we build a strong party, but it's also how we build a strong state and a strong nation.
No, and it's how you can get a bench back. There's been a concern, not everybody has the last name of Vilsack. And I say this with all due respect to the Vilsacks. I know they've been very good to the Iowa Democratic Party, but you got to sort of move on, right? You've got to be able to have a bench. Let me ask this. Give me, what are the issues to lean in on that you think brands an Iowa Democrat? And what are the issues to sort of lean out on and, be a bigger tent? That shouldn't be a purity test to be an Iowa Democrat.
I think that the issues are very clear. It's totally the economy, right? It's people being able to, it's the affordability of living anymore, right? Because costs are going up everywhere. In addition to the grocery store and the healthcare costs, electricity costs are going up and are going to go up further. These are things that really make day-to-day life really tough for people. So yeah, we've got to talk about affordability and how working families can get ahead, because the wages are not rising at the same level as the costs are going up. That's a big disconnect. And so that's and there's so many other issues. For instance, I think the other two issues that we have to be talking about a lot and listening to folks for solutions is in healthcare and in education. But each of those affect people's bottom line as well, right? When people understand how they can get an education that gets them a better paycheck, that's the kinds of things that we've got to prioritize. And when the costs of healthcare continue to rise, that makes things so tough for families. So we've got to be way leaning in on all of those issues. And that seems like a whole lot to me. And then as far as anything else is concerned, I think, again, we've got to have real conversations with people. and make that those conversations more about listening and less about telling, and quit dividing people and making people an us versus them on issues that really matter to families, right? About having to do with inclusion, having to do with how to handle some issues that have really divided us. We've got to talk about that compassionately and be a listener rather than so much of a teller.
I think you're referring to some of the cultural issues, some of the school issues, trans kids, things like this, which are 1%, 2% of the population. I get that. At the same time, they becomes definitional culturally, right? And it doesn't. It's funny the way these issues work in a community. Everybody, there's nuance and empathy when people focus on, hey, did you know the Jones family's situation? Well, everybody understands the Jones family situation. When it gets weaponized as some sort of two-dimensional thing on a national level, people sometimes go to their partisan corners.
Yeah, it shouldn't be so black and white, because, the Republican Party is always going to stick up for people's rights. People have the right to live the lives that they choose to live.
Shouldn't the Democratic Party always stick up for people's rights too? I mean, it was interesting the way you just put that.
Say it again. What?
You said the Republican Party will.
I'm sorry. Did I say the Republican? No, the Democrat. I am sorry if I said that.
No. Okay, I was.
That was not what I wanted to say, Jack. Okay, so the Democratic Party is always going to stick up for people's rights, right? That is just something that we believe in, and I think that reasonable people recognize that what people have the ability to live the lives they want to live, and maybe you have a strong opinion about that they're not doing it correctly or whatever, but leave them alone. Let them make their own decisions, right?
Sounds like the Iowa upbringing that I always say I got while in Miami. It was sort of like, you mind the Midwestern Methodist was, didn't tell anybody else how to believe in God.
Don't tell
they
anybody
knew how to
else
believe in God. We're not going to tell you how you should believe in God.
Right. Yeah. I think we've lost a lot of that, and people have become, again, trying to make political points rather than really looking at what would make the world a better place.
Let me ask the most complicated one of these issues that do divide is immigration, because the labor is necessary for many of the Iowa communities, right? There's immigrant labor at these meatpacking plants, and certainly in other parts of the agricultural business. At the same time, there's concern about law and order and security and all of those things. What's the best way for Democrats to be talking about immigration, in your opinion?
Well, again, I think that we've been pigeonholed, and I would tell you that a lot of people believe that Democrats are for open borders, and that just doesn't make any sense to me, right? In order to have a country that operates well, you have to have border control that makes sense, that is in the country's best interest. And so I think that again, we know that border issues and immigration issues have been building up and not being addressed for many, many administrations, right? That this is not something that just happened over the last few years. It's been going on for a long time. And we've got to get to a place where, again, across aisles, we got to get Republicans and Democrats to recognize that this country needs good border control, in order to recognize the realities that we are facing right now, that so much of our labor here in the Midwest is done by immigrant labor. And I think most people, Republican or Democrat, recognize and appreciate the value of hard work. And so when they see that immigrants are coming in and doing this work that we need them to do, that there ought to be a sensible way for them to get to citizenship. that's what's not happening now that I think is causing us a lot of problems.
I get a sense that there's some Midwestern Republicans, that even some elected leaders, that are trying to say this without getting Trump's ire. And they're not, you see it sometimes in the Chuck Grassley Twitter feed. You see it sometimes in John Thune's remarks. You see it sometimes in maybe certain senators who decide not to seek reelection. Do you get that sense? I mean, sort of Iowa has been an interesting state for Trumpism. On one hand, Trump has done very well there in general elections, but I also get the sense that he's not every Republican's cup of tea in Iowa, more so than other states.
Yeah, well, they recognize that, that attitude that says that that this is all one party's fault is not true. It's not the reality. And the fact that people know that we've got it, again, take Iowa, for example, that we're an elderly state that has got, and we are not growing as at a robust rate that's going to help us to fill these positions.
So
immigrants
need to get younger labor in some form or another.
Yeah. And so, there's just, I'm sure that there's a lot of pressure on Republicans to toe the line on this issue. But the realities here beg for a solution. And that's a much harder lift.
Look, one of the things I'm obviously a huge advocate of. I think Iowa is a unique state and it is a really good vetter in the presidential world. But I also believe that it isn't one state that should get the monopoly on these things. But there seems to be this sort of anti-Iowa vibe inside the DNC. Fair or unfair, it exists. You know it, you hear it, you see it. Do you think it's more? Do you think it's because the state is rural and white, or do you think it's because the last two caucus results were essentially unclear? How much? What do you think's been the bigger contributor, or is it hard to disaggregate?
Yeah, it's hard for me to disaggregate. I mean, keep in mind, Chuck, I've only been in this job for 2.5 years.
You were not in charge of the last. I got it. I totally get it. I know it is, and we, But anyway, go ahead.
But I would tell you what I've seen, which is that again, they might have that idea at the DNC, but the candidates did not get that memo because they're still showing up. They're coming and they're getting big crowds here, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think they recognize that this is a great testing ground for their campaigns, right? Because people do take it seriously and they do ask tough questions, and it's a cheaper media market, so that people can come in and do this without having to spend as much money as
the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, could run for president and have a shot at getting heard in Iowa. Oh, wait, did that happen? Yes, it did. Sorry.
Yeah. And, the other thing is that Iowans want to see that kind of a candidate come in and win, right? But they're going to test them hard. They're going to ask them the tough questions. They're going to truly be good vetters. And I'm glad that you recognize that. The other thing is the flip side of that, Chuck, is that what if that doesn't happen? Right? Like it didn't happen this last time, right? When the Republicans were able to come into a state like Iowa and do that very thing and spend millions of dollars.
Cost you 3 House seats, arguably, right?
Correct. And I would tell you that it hurt our presidency chances too, because they not only beat up on each other, they beat up on the present Biden administration, and we didn't have the ability to push back on that, and those millions of dollars did their trick, and I think that was really harmful to us as a party for the national nomination.
Look, I want to give you a couple chances to sort of make your public case, frankly, of why I think Iowa should be first in the nation. So let's start with rural voters. There is this debate, and I think I know where I fall on it, but I understand the math debate, which is, hey, you only have a finite amount of dollars, and in some ways you got to sort of target urban and suburban areas. And the rural vote is a nice to have, but not a need to have. And you sort of see it in how the Democrats have reoriented their focus on swing states. They're swing states with large metropolitan areas. See Georgia, see Arizona, see North Carolina, right? There is not an arguably, with New Hampshire is sort of an accidental exception in some way of a semi-rural state that is in the battleground that Democrats want to run and protect. So what give me your best answer as to why improving the Democratic brand, learning how to campaign in rural Iowa matters to a future president.
Yeah. So again, I think that we have much more in common with people, no matter what our political stripes are, than we have against, right? And so again, when you have a candidate who comes into a state like Iowa and can be up close and personal to them, and they have those kinds of back and forth, that strengthens that candidate, and it really does a good job of delineating the issues of where this person really stands, and is that going to be good for a state like Iowa, but for the country itself. And also, I'm telling you, also, Chuck, that I am not. You said you want to give me the opportunity to make the case for first of the nation. I'm having a conversation right now with our fellow Democrats because that we're not. I need to hear from them exactly what they want to do. I think it's a time for a bit of a change here in strengthening this whole process. And I think that-that's what Iowa can do if we continue to vet these candidates. But we're going to see what our Iowa Democrats have to say.
Well, I guess I would argue that it needs to be a rural state should be in the first four, right? A
I
primarily
agree.
Rural state, whether it's Kansas, whether it's Nebraska, whether
Center
it's
of the country. Yes.
right, somewhere in
Yes.
the center with an agricultural base that sort of has some roots, and when you look, sort of populist roots, right? And sometimes it's populist left, sometimes populist right, but there's some, I could argue it doesn't have to be Iowa, it could be Kansas, could be Nebraska, right?
Well, again, I think that there's the Iowa folks here know how to do this and have been doing it a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the infrastructure, and that's again what I'm trying to do with the Iowa Democratic Party. I think when you have a strong infrastructure in 99 counties of this state, then you have a situation where, again, a candidate who comes in and is successful here is going to be able to be successful in any kind of state across the country. And so that's what we're working is strengthening the party itself here in Iowa.
Right. Well, look, I mean, one of the reasons why Iowa kept its status for so long is that it was such a bipartisan state.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in some ways, the loss of, you had one senator from each party for such a long time that in some ways, do you have a working relationship with the Iowa? I mean, the Iowa Republicans, I'm sure, are nervous that someday their first in the nation status goes away if the Iowa Democrats aren't partnered with them. I mean, I know we're so polarized these days that state parties aren't allowed to speak to each other, but is there an opportunity at all that you see of working with the Iowa Republicans to sort of to essentially convince the national Democrats that, hey, the Republicans are going to stay here first in the nation? Do you really want to keep ceding this turf?
Exactly. And I think that anybody who is involved in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party needs to be talking to the other side. This is, when I was first elected to the legislature in 2012, that was the mantra then. You get under the dome and you put the campaigning behind you. You don't get to decide who shows up here to work on behalf of the Iowa people. You get to work with all of them. That's what your job is. And that's how I look at democracy in general, that we're all in this together. And so if you're a Republican leader or a Democratic leader, it's incumbent upon you to
Mhm.
talk to the other side and work with them and make this democracy work better for people.
All right, let's talk mechanical. Caucus versus primary.
So the thing that, this is what we're going to find out in this survey is what people really believe about that, right? Because we have strong opinions, and I've been going around the state with some regional events and having a one-on, a personal conversation with folks, as well as we're doing an online survey.
So you want this to be a decision that the state Democratic Party collectively
correct
says, okay, we're going to move. If you move to a primary, it's because Democratic leader.
Overwhelming thing.
It wasn't. Yep. It isn't. You, Rita Hart, is making this decision.
Correct. Right. Okay. Yeah. I want these people to weigh in on this, and so that I can see if there's a consensus on what we can agree on. And I would tell you that, there's obvious things that are a priority for me that might not be a priority for the majority of Democrats. So that's what we're going to find out. Whether people prefer caucus to primary. I know that what I can tell you is that there's a lot of people that think simplify it, just doggone it, simplify it. They don't want to do the math at a caucus. They don't want to stand in a corner and be counted. Yeah. But then there are other people who are saying, but this is how we make democracy better because we talk to our fellow Democrats. We have these conversations. So we're going to find out, what people think, and then what's possible, how we can all get together on what it should look like going forward.
So it sounds like well, no, I'm not going to. But it sounds like what you're hearing is that people would like to keep some form of the caucus, just make it simpler. Is
Maybe
that
so.
If that's possible, that's the preference over a primary? Is it just a primary seems a little too impersonal? Is that the concern?
I think that concern has been expressed. Now, I'm reserving my judgment here on what people think until we've got all the responses.
You're trying not to put your thumb on the scale, is what you're saying?
Absolutely not putting my thumb on the scale, and I don't have all the input. Right, we're going to be collecting these online surveys into November, and I've got some more events where I'm going to have these conversations. But I'm encouraged by the conversation so far. Because again, I think that people are seeing that that maybe there's ways to do this that could improve the process, and that's what I'm about. We want to have more participation. We want to have the ability to show up and get your voice heard in the easiest way possible. And if we can do that, I'll be really happy with the results.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've heard, one of the criticisms is, well, if you can't make it to that 3-hour window, then you don't get to participate. And yet it is the in-person, this isn't a final decision. This is in some ways a vetting decision, right? Like, I don't think that's a bug. I think that's a feature. But how do you navigate that?
Correct. It's a conversation that that we have about precinct primaries in general, right? That you have to be a Democrat or a Republican to participate. There's that aspect too. So it's all part of the animal. But I do think that when you have barriers that cause people who want to have their voices heard simply be unable to do that, then that's a problem. And if we could find a solution for that, we definitely should.
What's success look like for Iowa Democrats in 2026?
Yeah. So again, we have so many opportunities, and the bottom line for me is that we just have to start winning again, and so. We've got a terrific competitive governor's race ahead of us. We've got 4 congressional districts, 2 of which have already been targeted. We know that we have a real shot at least 2 of them. But we've got great candidates in all 4, and there's growth that's possible. So
2, not 3. I've always thought 3 of the 4 are competitive. And now
I would say 3 of the 4 are competitive for sure. 2 of them are targeted.
Okay.
And the third is definitely competitive, and we've got great candidates in the fourth. So, we've got real opportunities here.
Just to put, are the two that are officially targeted, is it 1 and 2, or is it
1 and 3?
1 and 3? I was because I
Yes.
asked. Yeah.
Yep.
So not the second right now.
Correct. But that could
Interesting.
change, right? Again, we've got terrific candidates, and they're working hard. They are canvassing the state. They are collecting volunteers. They are raising money. They're doing all the things that is going to really make this an exciting opportunity for us in 2026. And then the Senate race is, I could not be more thrilled with the quality of candidates that are running for that open Senate seat. And I would never have guessed that we'd be in this position, right?
Yeah.
And again, I would tell you that one of the reasons why we're in this position is because Democrats showed up, spoke up, put some pressure on. Other things got in there too, but there's a reason why both Joni Ernst and Kim Reynolds dropped out of these races. And again, it's been, I think, since 1968, since Iowa has had an open governor seat and an open Senate seat. So this is,
oh, no kidding.
This is 1968.
That's a good nugget.
Yeah.
Well, that means all the legacy media crowd is going to be very happy.
Yeah. And it just
there's some crowded airwaves. Those Iowa and Iowa State football games are going to have their share of political ads next fall. That's for sure.
Lots of excitement here in Iowa. And again,
all right, let me get you out of here on this question, just about how would you describe the job of a state party chair? And I say this, you were a candidate for office, you've served in office. Party chair is unique and different, but tell me some of the differences and what do you think the ideal skill set is, and what has surprised you so far about the job itself?
Well, I would tell you that I wasn't looking to take this job. But what I was interested in is being a part of figuring out how we can turn things around, how we can get Democrats elected in this state. And so I started asking a lot of questions, and I didn't get very many answers. Instead, I just got a lot of encouragement to run for this and so I knew that this was going to be in these circumstances that I picked it up in 2023 and all. There was a lot of pressure. This party was down and out. We didn't have there was money problems. There was a dispiritedness,
Some morale issue.
Yeah. So, and there was a lot of in people not happy, trying to do something, but not knowing exactly how to move forward, and so that caused a lot of strife. So I knew that it was going to be a lot of hard work, and I needed a lot of help. And so before I said yes to the job, I said, okay, if I consider doing this, will you help me in this regard? Because we've got this problem, and I think you have this skill set to help me, right? And a lot of people said yes to that. And then once I said yes and we were on our way, then they stepped up and did those things. It's very much a job where you need to work with a lot of people successfully, right? So I think I go back to teacher skills, right?
Yeah. I was just going to say, it sounds like, identifying the students and giving them a job. And if they have one job and you have 29 students, they all do their one job, maybe you get a lot done, right?
Exactly, right? And you have to be an encourager along the way, right? And you have to be a listener. Sometimes it's a thing of you want to be involved, but talk to me about who you are and what's your background and how you might be involved that would really be satisfying to you. That skill set, if we put it in there appropriately, is really going to pay off. So yeah, it's that kind of a job where I certainly have to develop a big team in order to get this done and be successful at it. And I've been really pleased with the number of people who have stepped up, the people who have been very helpful to me. they may have been at odds, but they didn't want to be. They wanted to get these things resolved so that they could work together as a team. And we have come a long, long ways in that. And so I'm pleased with what we've been able to accomplish in 2.5 years.
And you haven't, you're not burned out on fundraising, because that to me seems like the hardest part of the job. Is it?
This is how I look at fundraising. It's a job just like any, when I grew up on the farm, I tell this story a lot, and folks across the state know this story, that how I compare this to one job that we've always done on the farm, which especially here up in northern Iowa, where I grew up, you have to pick up a lot of rocks. You have to go out every year and clear the field so that you don't, ruin your machinery, and it's, the process works better. So you got to pick up all those rocks, and
pretty tedious. Yeah.
So we had a big family. We had I had 8 brothers and sisters, and I'm smack dab in the middle. So Dad would get us out on the edge of the field, and I have 4 older brothers and sisters and 4 younger brothers and sisters. And I soon figured out that you got to pick the rock that suits you, right? Leave the bigger ones for the bigger kids. Leave the smaller ones for the smaller kids. Everybody has their job, and your job is to pick up as many rocks as you can, get it up on the rack, and move along that field as a team. That's what we have to do as a party, right? Everybody has to pick their rock and do it as quickly and efficiently as possible, but work as a team, because sometimes there's a great big rock and it takes 4 or 5 of you to take that up and get it out of the way. And then you have a sense of accomplishment at the end, because you look back across the field and you see that maybe you didn't get every rock. And it's very likely that you're going to have a lot more rocks come up again next spring, and you're going to have to do this again. But you've accomplished something for this season, and you've been helpful to the effort of the farm itself. Your dad or whoever's going to be planting or harvesting doesn't have to get off the tractor to pick up a rock, because you've already done it for them. And everybody, no matter how old they were able to be a part of that team that got that done. So
I have to tell you, I expected something else other than rock when you began your story about picking up, because that's sometimes another part of farm life, right?
Yeah, that's right. You got to avoid that while you're picking up those rocks, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. Hey, Rita Hart, this was great. I appreciate the time.
Great to be here, Chuck. Thank you so much.